Very good to see you. Straightforward question. I am told that Robert Jenrick has resigned. Has he?
I understand that he has.
He has resigned. Do you know why? Has he given any explanation to you or to other ministers about why he has gone?
I don't, in all honesty, Andrew. I just came from the chamber and found out after I'd connected to your show.
Well, thank you very much for being so straight and candid with me. Can I ask you then about this bill? Because it does a couple of things which are very unusual and remarkable. One is that it does break international law. We've talked to Lord Sumption, who knows more about these things than almost anybody else, and he is quite clear that by restricting or removing access to the legal system, to the courts for migrants, it breaks international law. Do you think you can get this through the House of Commons, the House of Lords, given that?
Well, first of all, I defer, of course, to Lord Sumption, but may I just make 3 points? This case has been litigated extensively all the way up to the Supreme Court, and their decision was delivered 3 weeks ago. There were 3 principal criticisms of the Rwanda scheme. First of all, that in the state of Rwanda, there was not a genuine right of appeal. Secondly, that there was a risk of refoulement. In other words, that an asylum seeker could be returned to their country of origin before their claim was determined. And thirdly, that a monitoring committee, the sort of supervisory body, was not robust enough. This bill, together with the treaty, answers all 3 of those. So a new right of appeal will be comprised of a Rwandan president, a president from a Commonwealth country, judges from the international judges from other countries to oversee the appeals. No individual will be subject to refoulement because nobody can be removed from the state of Rwanda. Everybody removed to Rwanda will have a direct phone line to legal representatives in the United Kingdom, and in extreme will be returned to the United Kingdom. And finally, there are measures that beef up the monitoring committee. So, Andrew, just to come back to your question.
No, it's a very important point you make there. And
focused failure in the Supreme Court. But beyond that, there was no objection from the Supreme Court to the principle of removal to a third country, no objection to the general ability to live and to have a job and so on in Rwanda. So what the government is saying is we have answered in the most direct and specific terms every single one of those criticisms, and we're not going to be dragged through the court process again, because this is ultimately a deterrent policy trying to deter people from ever getting into those dinghies in northern France and making that crossing across the channel.
And the single most extraordinary sentence in the new bill simply says that everybody, all decision takers, which include judges, must agree that Rwanda is safe. That is a bit like ordering people to believe something they don't believe. I've never heard of anything like this in law before.
Andrew, I accept that it is unorthodox, but let me just say this to you. You have to refresh your memory as to what the Supreme Court Justice's criticism was. Every single one of them has been answered not by simply asserting that they're incorrect, but by saying, we take the defect and we rectify it. We're not simply saying Rwanda promises to do a better job. We're putting in international lawyers, international judges, a right to return to the United Kingdom. So we are answering all of those things. We're providing every safeguard that the Supreme Court said wasn't there, and we're therefore squaring the circle and tying up all those loose ends to create a safe removal arrangement.
Let me circle back to your former colleague, Robert Jenrick. Have you spoken to him at any point today?
I haven't. I haven't spoken to him. I hope I will speak to him this evening, but I haven't.
Right, and you haven't come across him. You've got no sense of what his demeanour was like, how he was feeling, because we did expect him to be in the House of Commons chamber today, and on the face of it, he seems to have got most of what he wanted from this bill, so it's a little bit of a puzzle.
Well, look, I have been in meetings with Robert just in relation to this and kind of the weeks leading up to it. And, you know, I agree that this was the kind of, we were always very cognizant of where the criticisms from the Supreme Court were and how we could best answer them in a way that would provide absolutely ironclad safeguards, particularly to the issue of refoulement, which really stood at the heart of their decision. So I have to say, I really am in the dark as to the reasons for his resignation. It would be presumptuous of me to start kind of guessing or speaking on his behalf.
Yeah. Well, I am professionally presumptuous, so let me have a go, because it does seem to me that given what Suella Braverman said in the Commons today and what she is saying already about this bill, which is she's really going for it, saying it's not nearly tough enough and so forth, you are facing quite a revolt on the right of the party, and Robert Jenrick is part of this. There is a coup or a putsch being prepared right now.
Look, I can't speak to that. All I can say is, and before I became an MP, I was a practicing barrister and I've done asylum cases, so I understand the issue of refoulement, and I'm familiar with the Refugee Convention and the protocol that accompanies it. And I think that this is a comprehensive response which basically deals with the critical issues. The issues that the Supreme Court identified were about the safety of people who were removed to Rwanda, not in a general sense, but in relation to the risk of removal, and the government has squared off every single one of them. And you don't have to simply say this is a case of British officials or Rwandan officials. They're bringing in international officials to ensure that the obligations that apply equally to Rwanda to comply with the Refugee Convention are honoured there just as they would be here.
So is this perhaps why Suella Braverman says it still allows migrants to make appeals and follow those appeals if they're successful, that it'll be done through that tribunal, and that is why she is unhappy with the system? And do you think this is why Robert Jenrick has gone?
I can't second-guess Robert Jenrick's resignation, Andrew, but I can say this. I was in the chamber for Suella's statement. She made it before the Home Secretary had made his statement, before he'd explained all the issues in full. I understand that she has an axe to grind about her terms of departure with the Prime Minister. She's been vocal every day since. I understand that. But that is completely separate for the question that you asked me at the top of this interview, which is whether or not this legislation is lawful, whether it answers the criticisms of the Supreme Court. And we believe that it does on both counts. And, the principle here, of course, as you will know, is that there is a sense that a very, very strong desire amongst my constituents and others, we should be able to control our borders in the way that the democratically elected government would wish to. And the only way we can deter people from making those payments of thousands of pounds to people smugglers and coming across the channel is by creating complete deterrent. And that it basically involves saying there will be no claim to asylum if you take that route. And by the way, I was just refreshing my memory as to how some of the House of Lords approached this when the illegal migration bill was going through the House. And Lord Brown of Eton under Hayward, who's a retired Supreme Court justice and himself was a public lawyer, spoke in a very, very kind of careful and very detailed debate and said, ultimately, it is an arrangement of this kind that is the only possible kind of deterrent that will ultimately deal with this problem.
Yes. Well, we may be beyond that already. We may be beyond that already. There were two other things that Suella Braverman demanded of the Prime Minister in that extraordinary resignation speech she made in the House of Commons. One was that there should be so-called Nightingale detention centres. I don't know what Florence Nightingale would think about having her name attached to prisons, but there we go. And that they should be put up very quickly with the help of the army. Is that going to happen? And the second thing was that you should be sitting right across Christmas. Is that going to happen?
Well, let me just say, look, I think this is emergency legislation, so there's going to be a desire to get it through the House. In relation to immigration detention, they're governed by something called Hardy Singh principles, which is the name of an important case that set the framework for that. And that says a person can be detained for the purposes of immigration removal if they are sort of, there is a reasonable prospect that they're going to be removed imminently. Now, there's lots of discussion about what that means. But ultimately, once we have the legislation through, then yes, people will go into immigration detention for the purposes of removal. But you can't detain people indefinitely. And I don't think actually that's the main issue that we're grappling with as parliamentarians at the moment, if I'm honest.